Thank you, Sue. That was a good introduction. Thanks. So what I wanted to talk about is, as Kay mentioned, I put together with the help of many of our delivery partners a resource called Free from Harm. I'll just tell you a little bit about why it came about, because one of the things we wanted to achieve with the program of work for Safer Beginnings was to also reach out to healthcare professionals. So clearly, all of the resources that went into the Baby Buddy app are aimed at mainly at service users. But we wanted to have something that was aimed specifically at healthcare professionals and mainly midwives, so it is for any maternity care worker. So the Safer Beginnings program, we decided to make this resource. So it's going to be available online digitally, and it's going to be printed and sent out to most of the NHS trusts in England, Scotland, and Wales. So you'll be looking out for that. But this is just a little flavor of what the front of it looks like in the back cover. So we've listed all of our delivery partners there. And as you can see, it's just a resource for maternity care workers on respectful care for all. So what does that mean exactly? We wanted to, at least this was my vision for it, is to not just create another resource that is about telling midwives and doctors and other healthcare professionals about, the harm that's being done to people under our care, and telling people, we need to address this, certainly, but not taking into account the conditions that midwives and other maternity care workers are working under and how that impacts the harm that is sometimes done to the people that we're looking after. As a midwife myself, I 100% believe that no one goes into care work wanting to harm anyone, and that any harms that do occur are almost always as a result of structural harms that are in place as a result of things like organizational culture or not having enough support, being in a really high trauma environment with maybe low morale, low support, understaffing. All of those things contribute to people having experiences of harm in maternity care. And what I specifically want to talk about in this document is obstetric violence. So we wanted to talk about obstetric violence in the context of not only how it affects women and birthing people, but also how the whole system of obstetric care can actually harm and abuse midwives themselves. So that's why we felt like it was needed. Who it's for, again, I said it's for midwives, but it's also for obstetricians, maternity care support workers, anyone who's interested in and works in the field of maternity. So obstetric violence is the topic we wanted to mainly address within this. So that is the main message that's within Free from Harm. So we go through some of the background of it, the origin and usage of the term, which is in itself somewhat controversial. So we do talk about why the term is controversial. Just to give a little flavor of it, the term originated in Venezuela, where there is no midwifery presence, and that's why the term is normally called obstetric violence. It doesn't mean that only obstetricians enact that violence or harm. Midwives are capable of it as well. Anyone is capable of inflicting harm. It's not about the gender of the person. It's about the model of care. So under the obstetric model of care, the harm is happening to people, and that's what we want to highlight. Obstetric violence is also, it's an individual, a structural or institutional, and a policy level problem. So it ranges very, very widely. It's not about pointing the finger and blaming individuals, though individuals can, of course, control their own behavior and actions. But we want people to start thinking about what might influence them to either be unkind or uncompassionate in their care, or to witness it and not feel able to speak up about it, because that's one of the largest things, one of the biggest problems, I think, having been a midwife myself and having witnessed obstetric violence and having seen the impact that it has on not only the families, not only the women and the birthing people who experience it, and how it can impact on their future pregnancies, their future births, and their whole life. Birth trauma stays with people. It can cause very severe mental health issues, emotional damage. It has long-term impact. It's not just that pregnancy or just that birth. But it also can impact midwives. seeing people experiencing harm or seeing people being harmed and feeling powerless to do anything about it is actually also harmful to midwives. It can cause emotional wounds that can contribute to burnout and to midwives feeling unsupported and that they need to leave the system if they're not getting that support. So we took a well-known tool, which is called the power and control wheel. If any of you have worked in domestic abuse or domestic violence areas, you might be familiar with it. This is a model that was created in America by a domestic abuse intervention program called the Duluth model. And this wheel, the power and control wheel, they created many years ago to help to illustrate how power and control plays out in domestic abuse. So as you can see in the middle there, it shows all the ways in which power and control are at the heart of the abuse and the harm and the violence that's enacted on women in domestic violence situations. So what we wanted to do was take that wheel and adapt it for maternity. So one of the things that we've done within the Free From Harm resource is to do our own adaptation, which we did through official channels. We worked with the Duluth model people to adapt these. We did this in consultation with many midwives and with service users, people who work in maternity care, in charities. And after many consultations with them, we've adapted the power and control wheels to represent two different areas. So obstetric violence that impacts women and birthing people and families. So that's the one there on your left. So I know you can't read it, the writing's quite small, but it talks about how it breaks down into sections, and so that we can very clearly see how obstetric violence plays out. So it can be physical abuse, things like forcing you to birth on your back, restraining someone, deliberately causing pain. It can be sexual harm as well, if it's involving intimate areas. So anything performed without consent, especially if it's, like a vaginal examination that's been done without proper consent, can actually be really sexually traumatizing to people, regardless of their history, if they have a history of sexual abuse or not. Emotional, institutional, coercive, it's the whole package. Any ways that someone can be harmed within the obstetric model of care is sort of represented in that wheel. And what I was really keen to do as well is within this resource is to not, again, point a finger and say, this is, people are being awful, this harm is happening. Because again, as a midwife myself, I know that no one goes into this wanting to harm anyone. And that there's so many similarities between the things that are in place that enable obstetric violence to happen that also actually contribute to violence and harm happening in the workplace. And I know that might be a slightly controversial view, and we do know that some people might find that a little bit shocking, but we felt it was really important to illustrate that there are similarities. So underneath, say, physical power and control for a person working in maternity care, so a midwife or a doctor, whoever it is, if you're not, if you're being overworked, for example, through lack of staffing, you're not being given a place or a time to rest, eat, drink, etc., to attend to your own needs, having a shift pattern that contributes to poor health, whatever it is, that is actually a harmful environment that you're working in, and that undoubtedly contributes to how you are able to give care, how compassionate you're able to be, how well you're able to listen to people's experiences and signpost them to the correct information. So again, it's not about pointing the finger, it's about highlighting the fact that these two things go together, and we cannot address and correct the trauma and violence and abuse that are happening to women during their birth experiences without also addressing the fact that midwives and other people who work in maternity care are not being treated well themselves. It was really important to us as well to include elements of storytelling, because White Ribbon Alliance, we feel it's really important to listen to people's experiences and not just go on sort of academic research or what we think is right. We want to listen to people's experiences, hear those stories, and then use that in order to decide what action we're going to take next. And part of it in the resource that I really was keen to highlight was not only stories from women and birthing people and maybe their partners, of obstetric violence, but also midwives' voices. So we've included lots of quotes in there from midwives that were collated through March with Midwives, which is a grassroots organization that hopefully many of you will have heard of, that has put on some demonstrations over the last couple of years in solidarity with midwives and the conditions that they're working in. So we've taken some quotes directly from them, and many of them were in the consultations that we held to create this resource as well. So throughout the resource, we ask reflective questions. We've put in additional resources, opportunities for people to learn more, training opportunities, various documents that they can read for further training. So it's not a huge resource, and that it's not, reinventing the wheel, but we've put together and kind of collated all the wonderful information that's already out there and put it together in one place. Because at the end of the day, the main priority, if we want to address unsafe care, which is exactly what we are all trying to address at the moment, from the top, the top highest level at government level, all the way down to the shop floor worker, every one of us is trying to address unsafe care. Things that have been highlighted in the Kirkup reports and Ockenden report have all picked up on the fact that it's uncompassionate care, people not being listened to, people not being treated well. So it's not just about physical safety, it's about emotional and psychological safety. And that's hugely important for both our workers or midwives and the people they're looking after need to feel emotionally cared for and psychologically safe in order to not experience harm. So again, we've collated loads of resources. We've worked with several delivery partners. And what we really would like to do is, this is just a whistle-stop tour, but if you come to any of the launch events that Kay mentioned earlier, the one for healthcare professionals is on the 10th of March in Manchester. And there we're going to be going through it in much more detail. And also, we've partnered with the Point of Care Foundation, which you may be familiar with. They run the Schwartz rounds, which I know many NHS trusts already have. And they'll be doing a demonstration round to talk about the importance of emotional support for staff through storytelling and sharing our experiences of what it's like to provide healthcare in the current environment. So that is me.